This is a long-term effort that both IEEJ and EPRINC, and I'm going to start. I was going to have Yoshi's going to give us a few comments about the cooperative effort we have with EPRINC on this. But let me just give you some background on this, and so we can get started. So we have a pretty big delegation from Japan here. People have come a long ways. We have I think we have Sally Sun came from Singapore. We have a lot of folks came up from Houston, not quite as long. Probably culturally and mindset, it's a lot longer than Singapore, but I'm very happy. And the depth of talent in this room today is really quite remarkable. I'm going to have Yoshi talk a little bit about IEEJ. I'll just tell you a bit about EPRINC. We've been around since 1944, and we're in the intersection of public policy and petroleum economics. We publish everything we can and we put it on the website. And I also want to thank our sponsors today, the hard work Soda-san and Tanaka-san did at MIDI to help get this started. The work at IEEJ, the 12-hour time difference doesn't make this stuff easy to do. And also Japan Oil and Gas Metals Corporation. Hirazumi Harai is here, and we are very grateful to his effort. We also have some other sponsors. Betsy Spomer from Verizon, or Jordan Cove. We're very grateful, and also Jim Avilas from Prometheus, so thank you very much. I also want to thank Rob Smith at DOE and Rick Westerdale at the State Department for giving us a lot of guidance on this project and sort of being willing to engage. You know, when you see these events, they look seamless. They're not. We had to take Will Pack off his ongoing assessment of Anwar. We have an entering freshman at Cornell, John Dahlberg, who has gone full-time on this. And I don't know if many of you know our administrator, Yulan Gao. She is an award-winning photographer, and she's going to practice that art today. She does other things than keep us out of jail. So regarding our moderators, the presenters, and the commentators today, this is a really well-informed and very deep group. And so I think I'm very privileged that everyone has agreed to participate in this. And and I want to go over the objectives just very quickly. If you look at the dynamics of longer-term Asian demand, you can get wrapped up in these point estimates. And so one of the things we want to do is really get a handle on the uncertainty and how might small or modest changes in the dynamics of the way these markets work affect longer-term LNG demand, particularly what should be the role of the government. We're also going to be looking at the regulatory framework, the capacity of the North American natural gas production base to lift production and to meet a lot of our longer-term requirements should LNG demand expand substantially. There are two more working groups scheduled. There's one 8 days from now in Tokyo. I'll be going. Yoshi and I will be both going to that one, of course. And then there will be one in Bangkok and a final one in Washington. All of this is to generate the analysis research for IEEJ and EPRINC to put a series of recommendations for policymakers before the October meeting of the LNG consuming and producing countries. So we're engaged in real work here today. We're hoping to learn and get the fundamentals of some of the information we need to undertake the research effort. We are going to be operating on a kind of modified Chatham House rules. So if the presenters give us permission, we will post those presentations on our website. I believe most of them will. But the commentary and the discussion is off the record. So if Howard Grunsbeck tells you he had dinner last night with Elvis Presley, that's okay, but you just can't say Howard told you that. So, that is basically the rules, because we want an open and full discussion here. We're going to start out with, I'm going to have Yoshi make a few remarks. And should we start with Toyota-san's? Yes, okay. We have a video message from Okay. So we're going to go now? So go ahead and run the welcoming message from Toyota-san.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am Masakazu Toyoda, Chairman and CEO of the Institute of Energy Economics Japan. I regret that I have to be in Tokyo due to my previously committed assignment and cannot participate in today's workshop. Therefore, please allow me to make my opening remarks by this video message. First of all, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to all of the distinguished guests and speakers today. I especially would like to extend my special thanks to Mr. Ru Fugareshi for preparing and organizing today's workshop. Without his energetic support and commitments, today's workshop would have never been realized. As all of us are aware, natural gas has numerous advantages. Its resources are enormous and now can be developed at a competitive cost thanks to the technological breakthrough by shale revolution. Its resource locations are more diversified compared to oil and gas, has an advantage for energy supply security. It can play a significant role to address climate change if replacing coal in the power sector. It is a clean and very convenient energy to use in our daily life. Expanding use of natural gas can significantly improve so-called 3 E's. Asia will be the center of energy market in the coming decades. According to our institute's outlook, the total energy demand in Asia will grow by 1.9% annually until 2030, while the remaining part of the world's average growth rate during the same period is just 1%, almost half of that of Asia. No other part of the world provides a larger demand potential for natural gas in the future. And if natural gas could take a larger share of this large demand growth in Asia, it will significantly benefit the region in terms of 3 E's. I believe LNG will have a key role to enhance natural gas use in Asia. There are, of course, quite a few challenges to realize such expansion of LNG demand in Asia. First, as LNG requires large upfront investments for infrastructure, clear commitments and policy supports by host governments are necessary to facilitate such investments. Government support will reduce uncertainties and investment risks in such efforts. Second, cost competitiveness of LNG among other energy is also important because many of prospective LNG markets are also coal-producing countries, and renewable energy, solar PV, and wind power are growing with some incentives given by the government as well as their own cost reduction. Without cost competitiveness, LNG will never be chosen by consumers. In addition, when we think about the competitiveness of shale gas from the US to Asia, we need to think about that compared with other geographically closer region to Asia. Then transportation and liquefaction costs need to be reduced as much as possible. Third, enhancing tradability and gas-to-gas-based pricing are equally important. The existing oil-linked pricing custom will cause another Asian premium problem when crude oil prices recover and will damage interests of both LNG sellers and buyers by ruining its price competitiveness in Asia. In this context, the recent announcement by JFTC, Japan Fair Trade Commission, on the incompatibility compatibility of destination clause would be useful to expand the LNG market in Asia. Besides today's conference, IEEJ plans to hold similar workshops in Japan and Bangkok, Thailand, by inviting industrial players in Japan and other Asian countries, respectively, to discuss the same subject. Based on the discussions of the three locations, IEEJ EPRINC will jointly prepare and present a study report at the LNG Producer Consumer Conference held in Tokyo on 18th October this year. I'd like to conclude my remarks by hoping that active and lively discussion in today's conference will formulate creative and effective policies and measures to lead to a bright future of energy in Asia, including that from the United States. Thank you very much for your attention. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am Masaka.
Thank you. We're going to get some brief remarks on kind of from the governments of Japan and the United States on what we call LNG vision and some background to this. And so I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through the biographies. You'll have their biographies. If we fully introduced everyone based on our biographies, we would use up most of the day. These are very people with enormous experience. And first, my apologies, we did cut back everyone's biographies in order to preserve some old growth forests. I mean, the accomplishments of the folks here today are quite remarkable. So we want to hear from first an old friend of mine, Kazushige Tanaka. I've known him. He's director of the international division at the Agency for Natural Resources at the Japanese Ministry for Economics, Trade, and Industry. And then Rob Smith from the Department of Energy. He's the Deputy Assistant Secretary in Fossil. And Rick Westerdale, who's been at the ENR, we call it now, at the State Department. I spent many years in the policy planning staff, and we didn't have such a bureau then. And Rick has really done a lot of the leading work there, particularly in the Middle East, but he's quite knowledgeable, having come from the petroleum industry. He spent many years at ExxonMobil. So with that, Tanaka-san, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Uru-san, for your kind introduction. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kazushige Tanaka, the director of the METI. I'm very, very honored to be here today together with the distinguished speakers and guests. As you know, Japan has been the biggest importer of LNG. We will continue to use LNG in the future. Based on our energy outlook, Japan continued to use the LNG over 60 million tons in 2030. But that number will increase dependent on the nuclear power and fuel switching. But the growth will come from other Asian countries. Asian LNG demand will grow rapidly over 3 times in 2030, some experts expected. I think that growth cannot achieve automatically. Many Asian countries need, for example, infrastructure, legal framework, capacity building, and so on. Japan want to support those countries. We have a long history of using LNG. And US can support those countries with flexible energy export technologies and so on. US and Japan have the big chance to cooperate to expand Asian energy market together. So today, I'm very excited to hear what's the potential we have in the future. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks. Good morning, everyone. As Lou said, my name's Rob Smith. I'm the Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary for Oil and Natural Gas at the U.S. Department of Energy. I'd like to thank Lou and EPRINC and Kobayashi-san and IEEJ for organizing this event, and also our hosts here at the Willard for such a beautiful venue to have this day-long discussion. I'd also like to thank Director Tanaka-san for your continued dialogue and collaboration with us, and the continued dialogue between the United States Department of Energy and METI on strategic initiatives important to both the United States and Japan. And a little off topic, but I'd like to take the opportunity to thank our colleagues from JOGMEC who are here for your continued collaboration with DOE on methane hydrate research, particularly on the North Slope of Alaska. We very much value our collaboration with you and look forward to continued research success on the North Slope. President Trump and Secretary Perry have continued to offer their full-throated endorsement of continued energy exports from the United States, including liquefied natural gas. So I think the president has well articulated the policy of the United States and that it's in our national interest to continue to develop our domestic resources and to support the energy security needs of our allies and trading partners around the world. We now all know that the shale revolution is real, that abundant domestic natural gas resources are here in the United States. Yesterday, many of you probably took note of the Potential Gas Committee's latest evaluation of natural gas resources in the United States, and 2,800 T's of natural gas is an enormous, abundant resource that will both, over the coming decades, support both domestic demand and growth in the export market. Also, as many of you here know, the Department of Energy regulates natural gas trade for the United States. The team that reviewed those applications is led by John Anderson, who's here from my office today, and they reside in the Office of Oil and Natural Gas. To date, DOE has authorized over 21 billion cubic feet per day of LNG exports to destinations around the world, and there are 6 projects, 6 large-scale projects under construction in the United States today, with 3 of the trains at Sabine Pass already operating. And there are a number of projects continuing through the formal process at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. One of the things that we're taking note of and that I think we'll discuss here today is only half of those projects fully permitted in the United States have been sanctioned and are under construction. So about 10 Bs of capacity under construction or operating, but another 10 or 11 billion cubic feet per day waiting to be sanctioned, some at brownfield projects under construction, other whole projects that have not gone to final investment decision. And so I'm looking forward to hearing, as part of our discussion today, what are the changes that are going to occur? What do you see as developments in the evolution in LNG markets, particularly in Asia, that will facilitate the sanctioning of those projects? And what are the actions and policies that the United States government could have that would support and facilitate the further expansion of that LNG export demand? So with that, thank you for your attention, and again, for all of you coming to share in this discussion. I look forward to today's event. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Rick Westerdale, and I'm with the U.S. State Department, and it is a true pleasure and honor to be here before you today. I would like to thank the sponsors of this event, the Energy Policy Research Foundation and the Institute of Energy Economics Japan. These sort of dialogues are very important because it helps to establish a common understanding and something that we can all benefit from. I would like to reinforce some of the remarks that have been made by my fellow panelists up here. In particular, we are living in a time of change, and nowhere is it more so evident than in the global energy markets. This picture many of us had growing up of OPEC countries producing and OECD countries consuming has been shattered. And, great examples of this are the demand growth that we're seeing in the Asia Pacific or the production growth, the shale revolution here in the U.S. We do live in a globally interdependent economy. And again, the energy markets are perhaps one of the best examples of that, where energy shortages, price volatility, or supply disruptions anywhere threaten economic growth everywhere. So we all do remain energy independent. And I would submit to you the combination of these factors actually has helped many in government to evolve their thinking. And I would say that we've emerged from 4 decades of energy scarcity, which has driven much of the policy you see globally, almost in a zero-sum game. Many talked about peak oil and other things, to where we find ourselves today, which is a time of energy abundance. And how we utilize those resources is going to become very important to the future we leave to our children and our grandchildren. And this fundamental change can increase geopolitical stability. It can foster, as I mentioned, economic growth. And if we manage it right, it can also have a positive impact on the environment. At the State Department, we really do deal with that nexus of energy and foreign policy, as Lou alluded to. Now, I know many of you are wondering and want to hear about the new administration and what the energy policies mean for both industry, for our foreign interlocutors, and our relationships around the world. And while I think what you'll see is perhaps some subtle shifts and changes in emphasis under the new administration, we have an opportunity, and I would encourage us to do so today, to think creatively about continuing to work together with our friends like those that are in this room and our allies to achieve collective energy and broader economic policy goals. So what do those look like? What are those collective goals? And I would like to hit on the 3 pillars of the America First Energy Plan. And I think this is an important anchor for these discussions. The first pillar is around removing barriers to energy development and trade. And again, those are things that we're going to be talking about over the course of this day. The second, for us, is to promote U.S. energy exports, including resources, technologies, and services. Again, very important and material to our discussions. And the third is to ensure the economic and energy security for the U.S. and our allies and partners. Again, we certainly consider Japan among our friends, and we look forward to continuing the very strong relationship we have. I'm not going to go through any of the specifics of the markets. I think we'll get into that a little bit later, but I would like to emphasize just one thing, and this builds upon Rob's remarks a moment ago. Since February of 2016, we've truly seen some historic changes in the global LNG markets. Rob talked about the approvals that have occurred here in the U.S., and in fact, we have our first LNG shipment that left the U.S. back in February of 2016. Since that time, we've had over 140 cargoes with a truly global footprint to more than 20 countries. And again, without going into the specifics, I would just submit to you that 40% of this LNG has gone to Latin America, 27% to Asia, 18% to the Middle East, and 14% to Europe. And what this translates to is a real opportunity, an opportunity in terms of trade, but also an opportunity in terms of a more efficient and effective marketplace. And I think that's going to be one of our ultimate goals from the discussions and the work that we're collaborating on here. So I think I'll leave it at that. It's good to see so many old friends and colleagues around the room, and I look forward to our discussions today. Thank you.
the sort of fury we had here, Laura. We had some technical setbacks, so I think we seem to have everything back put together. But we do have a couple of extra minutes, and so what I'd like to do is maybe we should all very quickly introduce ourselves. You've met everyone up here, so maybe starting with Glenn Sweetnam here from DOE. I could probably introduce most of you, but I'll let you do it yourself. We'll work our way around, and so at least you'll know who's here.
Good morning. I'm Glenn Sweetnam, the Director of African and Middle Eastern Affairs at the Department of Energy.
Hi, Aaron Annable. I cover energy for the Canadian Embassy here in D.C.
I'm Steve McGregor. I'm a board member of EPRINC, and I've worked with Lou in collaboration and collusion for more than 40 years now.
Landon Darren, I'm with the State Department Energy Resources Bureau.
John Bear with AN Corporation.
Clayton Finney, I'm with Baker Hughes at GE Company. We merged our oil and gas assets with Baker Hughes just a couple weeks ago, and I'm still waiting on my new business cards, and I look out for the LNG market in North America. Thank you for having me.
I'm Fred Hutchison, Executive Director of LNG Allies.
Chris Caswell, Director of Global LNG Technology and Development with KBR. We're an EPC design build company.
Hi, Anthony Livanios with U.S. Energy Stream, private company. We promote U.S. LNG exports and American energy investments.
I'm Rick Smead with RBN Energy. We are an oil, gas, and natural gas liquids fundamentals market advisor, and we help people find supply.
Good morning. Takeshi Shinohara from Osai Gas USA Corporation based in Houston. Looking forward to the discussion.
David Goldwyn, Goldwyn Global Strategies, former State and Energy Department.
Good morning. My name is Kaz Shimotomai from Mitsui & Company, Washington, D.C. office.
Ken Medlock from Rice University's Baker Institute in Houston.
Good morning. My name is Hiroshi Hiraizumi. I'm from Jogmec, Washington office.
Doug Hengel, LNG Allies.
Kyoichi Miyazaki with Poten & Partners, Inc., based in New York.
Reggio Fujikawa, Tokyo Gas.
Good morning. My name is Kadono from Jogmec, Houston.
Good morning. Sally-san from Tellurian. We're one of the youngest companies, but I'm based in Houston, Singapore right now. I got the honor to work with both Betsy and Helen while I was back in Houston. It's great to be here. Look forward to hear all the great advice from everybody. Thank you.
Good morning. Eiko Konishi from the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, Japan.
Good morning. Isao Kozaki from Mitsubishi Corporation, based in Houston.
I'm Kevin McNeil with Talisman Group. We're one of the investors in Delphine LNG, one of the U.S. LNG projects.
Adam Semensky, CSIS, here in Washington.
Hidenobu Teramura, Nippon Export Investment Insurance, Japanese ECA.
Howard Grunspeck, I'm the Acting Administrator of the U.S. Energy Information Administration.
Good morning, Betsy Spomer. I'm with Jordan Cove LNG. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks.
Good morning. I'm Satoshi Naito from JERA, based in Houston.
Hi, I'm Jason Fear with Poten, based in Houston as well.
Ryoji Uchida from Japanese Embassy here in D.C.
Alan Townsend from the International Finance Corporation. We're the private sector arm of the World Bank Group.
Steve Galogly, EPRINC, former state in IEA.
Hi, Evan Harji with Aramco's DC office.
Good morning. My name is Naoko Kato, Oil and Gas Division of Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry of Japan.
Good morning. I'm Helen Curry with ConocoPhillips, based in Houston.
I'm Jim Avalis, Prometheus Energy Group, based out of Houston.
Greg Bartholomew, gas strategist for Sempra LNG and Midstream.
Good morning. My name is Max Pujor. I'm Director for Downstream Projects. That's my technical title. But I work for EPRINC, and that means I do whatever Lou tells me.
I'm John Anderson, the Director of Regulation, International Engagement at U.S. Department of Energy. We process the LNG applications at the department. Bring forms?
Yeah, John, can you start over there or on this side, either one, as we get the other folks to introduce themselves?
Colin Grubbs of Statoil's DC office.
I'm Kaku Miyamoto from Tohoku Electric Power Company based in DC.
Brad Phillips, Sempra LNG and Midstream.
Lee Livergood with Mitsubishi's DC office.
Jeff Kissel, I'm a trustee here.
Teresa Pugh Consulting for electric utilities interested in natural gas storage.
Victoria Zaretsky, U.S. Energy Information Administration.
Ray Buhager here in Washington for Jordan Cove.
Desmond Dahlberg, Keybridge Research here in DC.
Koji Hosh, Jogmek, Washington, DC office.
Dave White, U.S. State Department, Bureau of Energy Resources.
Thank you all so much. So how we're going to do this is we're going to play a little musical chairs. Every panel chairman and presenters and commentators will move here, and the rest of us will move and take your places. So I'm going to introduce our first panel of the day, Understanding Asian LNG Demand and Long-Term Uncertainty, chaired by a very old friend, Adam Szymanski. Someone suggested this was the rise of the graybeards, but I think it's become the rise of the whitebeards.
I think you should say long-standing friend.
All right, great, thanks. And so let's take a couple of minutes to do that, and then I'll have Adam do the introductions for his crew. Thanks so much, guys. Okay, could I have everyone's attention? Atten- People are not paying attention. Attention, please. Thank you. So, although I'm not going to encourage you to use your devices, we do have an access code. It's EPRINC 2017. So I presume you just go to Willard. It's Willard Conference, and you can go to EPRINC 2017. I'm going to just say a few brief words about Adam. I knew him a long time ago. I think we both had dark hair then. When he was in the... Yeah. So he was in the...
That's the second time that he's been disrespectful.
And, you know, Adam I don't know, anybody who interacted with him in his many years heading up EIA, which is not an easy job, okay? And he really did great things with that agency. And, you know, most of the folks that work in energy research, you couldn't do your work unless you had EIA. I mean, EIA probably should collect a small fee from all of us, but they haven't figured out how to monetize the value of the good work they do. And I always encourage everyone to tell their members of Congress how important the agency is. And I really encourage you to read Adam's biography, which we, of course, shortened like everyone else's. But this is a very important panel because we have a kind of conventional wisdom that there's too much LNG, and that may be true. There may be, but you have to get both. You have to look at both axes, and there's both how much LNG, and then there's time. And the picture gets quite uncertain the farther out we go, and so we're going to explore that today because understanding that uncertainty is really key to the other pieces of this effort, including the financing and the capacity of the North American production platform to expand, and what the technology offers us over time to get the American LNG exports more competitive. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Adam.
Okay, thanks very much, Lou. Pleasure to be here. Delighted to have Howard Grinspecht and Kiyoshi Miyazaki on the panel with me. Let me just give a couple of words about both Howard and Kiyoshi. Howard was named the Deputy Administrator of EIA back in March of 2003. And he's been the acting administrator, I think this is the third time. Is that the third time, Howard? He's the agency's top career official and is involved in all aspects of EIA from the standpoint of supervising the collection of the data and the analytical products, but taking a really strong hand in assuring the independence and impartiality of EIA's work. While I was at EIA and things like Lou just said here, I've heard time and time again about the great things that happened at EIA over the past 4 or 5 years. Let me assure you that Howard Grinspecht played a huge role in the success, I think, that EIA, while I was there, was able to bring to kind of new, innovative, more timely products. And without Howard's terrific understanding of how to make the system work at the Department of Energy, it really wouldn't have been possible to get that done. So Howard, thank you very much. Kiyoshi Miyazaki is a senior consultant at Poten & Partners up in New York. A long and practical experience in the fields of energy and trade finance. At Poten, Kiyoshi contributes to Asia Pacific and North American market due diligence analysis. He does that for financial institutions and companies, and includes recent projects for a number of existing and planned LNG projects in the Americas. So we're delighted to have him here. Kiyoshi's presentation is up and running on the system here. We'll go with Kiyoshi first and then Howard second, and we'll be delighted to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Adam-san, for a kind introduction. I'm very pleased and honored to be here in this very prestigious venue. I'm originally from Japan. I've been living in the States for over 13 years. It's my personal honor to participate in this kind of workshop where US-Japan relationship is very important when we are seeing a lot of uncertainties in the global LNG market. And I was asked to talk about, as in the title, Understanding Asian LNG Demand and Long-Term Uncertainties. My presentation will focus on this topic for about 10 minutes with 7 or 8 slides. Starting with key thoughts, key insights. First, I think not all LNG importing countries or markets are created equal. For example, Japanese market, which started importing LNG in 1969, and our demand peaked in 2014 with 88.5 million ton, is very different from niche markets that we are seeing in the last 2-3 years, especially in Southeast Asia. There are unique opportunities, but unique uncertainties, risks that need to be dealt with. And I'm not saying this because I'm Japanese, but I think there are a lot of Japanese opportunities there, coordinating with the US and other countries. Number two, the drivers for this global LNG demand growth is emerging markets or niche markets. China, India, niche markets in Southeast Asia, Middle East, Africa. And behind these drivers, especially for niche markets, as written in the third bullet point, FSRUs, the floating storage regasification units, and FSU included, are pushing these new markets to be developed. And the niche markets have unique characteristics that could be seasonality, could be the low credit ratings, and for Japan, involving NEXI, JBIC, and other institutions will be critical. And not to forget World Bank, IFC, coordination cooperation. Now, next bullet point is about uncovered demand. By definition, it's demand minus existing contract volume. If we look at Japan, and I think a lot of market participants will agree that LNG demand for Japan will decrease. And I heard about 60 million ton or so. Our view is more in the 70s. But anyways, that doesn't mean that suppliers are not interested in Japan, because there are a lot of existing contracts that the Japanese buyers need to renegotiate. By 2021-22, there's about 7.2 to 7.4 million ton of Qatari volumes that Japanese buyers might renew, maybe not fully, maybe reduce the volume, we'll see. And with those existing contracts that could expire, that could be renewed, there is an opportunity for Japan as well, from the supplier's perspective. And also buyer's point of view as well. Japanese buyers have oversupply situation from 2018 to 2021 or so. They need to be suppliers as well. And that's why they need flexible LNG, destination-free LNG like US LNG, and there will be trading opportunities. And for Japanese buyers as well, understanding uncovered demand will be critical. Lastly, I would like to show you our base case view on supply-demand balance imbalance. Again, I think there's market consensus to some extent that around 2022 or so, there's new opportunity for new supply projects. I would like to show you our low case and high case, how that timing could change, how that could speed up or be delayed. And that's another uncertainties that we are facing as an industry. So starting with not all markets are created equal. JKT, traditional Asian markets. Traditional sounds like they are a stable market with steady growth, maybe not strong growth, but steady growth. But in recent years, we are seeing a tremendous uncertainty in the so-called traditional markets. Japan, not to mention about nuclear, the liberalization process in the downstream, power and gas, are making incumbents very difficult to project the future. They're conservative by nature, so they have buffers, and they'll manage well, I believe. But if we look at Korea, due to new government, suddenly they said, well, let's shut down 8 coal-fired plants in June, and let's see how it goes. Let's phase out about those coal plants, power plants that are 30 years old or older than that. That's a great uncertainty. And the new government is saying that they're going to shift to renewables and natural gas, which is a good news for LNG in a way. But what's going to happen in the next administration? We never know. And there's North Korean issue in the Korean Peninsula. I'm not a geopolitical analyst at all, so our base case is something will, the situation will stabilize somehow. But Korea has its unique uncertainties. Taiwan also has nuclear issue. They're building new nuclear plants, units, 2 units, Longmen 1 and 2. They're almost complete, but the current government is saying, let's stop that and also phase out of nuclear. That sounds good for natural gas LNG usage, but their bottleneck is the import terminal capacity. The utilization is close to 100%, sometimes over 100%, meaning I guess they were able to do some debottlenecking, but they really need to increase capacity, expand capacity at the existing terminals, and they really need to build 1 or 2 more import terminals, including maybe FSRU. So that's a great uncertainty. I sound negative, but there's opportunities for a lot of people. China, India, growing markets from the economic growth point of view and population growth point of view. Good news about China for LNG is that the natural gas demand will grow. But bad news for LNG is that LNG needs to compete with relatively cheap domestic production, pipeline gas from Central Asia, Myanmar, and in the future, Russia. The demand will grow, but LNG needs to be competitive. The market is not deregulated. It needs to be more transparent. And if oil price is low, LNG could be relatively competitive, but it really depends on how the policies of China is defined into the future. India, another growth market, but again, LNG is going to compete to some extent with domestic production offshore. We view that there wouldn't be pipeline gas coming into India anytime soon, which is not bad for LNG. But the growth, there is growth, and there's huge room for power gen demand to grow for gas. But there's price control, kind of subsidy, where producing electricity is more expensive than the electricity price in India. So those are the challenges that LNG market in India is facing. Niche markets, and I'll combine Southeast Asia and Middle East. These markets are driven by power gen demand and basically replacing liquids, heavy fuel oil, and so forth for the power gen fuel to natural gas. There's room, a tremendous room for LNG to get into these markets. Each market is very small. Well, start from 0.5 maybe, and it could grow to 1 and then 2 and so forth. But there are a lot of uncertainties on the regulatory side, political risk side. And at POTEN, we do help these governments, these markets to develop LNG infrastructure together, sometimes with World Bank. The government officials, sometimes they think that it's easy to import LNG. When they see Pakistan importing, suddenly they think, oh, it must be easy for us as well. But actually, it took about 10 years for Pakistan to start importing LNG. And suppliers struggled tremendously at the beginning. So these markets need to understand what LNG business is like, and the coordination between suppliers and these governments and government-owned companies need to work together collaboratively. Middle East growing, interestingly, even though they're exporting, especially Qatar is exporting a lot of LNG. They have a high seasonality pattern, especially in peak summer load, Kuwait, Dubai, Abu Dhabi. And the suppliers will need to think about how they could provide flexible LNG, thinking about the profiles of these demand. And there's some political risk, country risk that need to be taken care of. Again, in total, it's going to grow. So these markets are the ones that Japanese and others are looking at. Briefly on South America and North America. South America, maybe because I'm based in New York, I'm based in the States, a lot of companies are interested in South America, but it is a challenging market. Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Caribbean. The real growing market, in our view, is only Chile. There's steady growth because of the mining industry behind the natural gas LNG growth, although renewables is kicking off. Argentina, LNG demand should decrease in the future because of shale gas production, especially beyond 2020. Brazil, offshore production, especially beyond 2020. And they have a high seasonality pattern where if there's a lot of rainfall, if there's hydro generator running fully, they don't need natural gas. So they're more reliant on spot and medium-term contracts. North America, nothing to mention because it shifted from LNG importing country to exporting country. And lastly, Europe, especially Northwest Europe. It's a gas-on-gas market, a liquid market. It's pipeline gas market. So they rely on, even though they don't want to that much, they rely on Russia, Norway, and Algeria. They're called market of last resorts because when LNG cargoes are not needed in the global market, that's when those cargoes end up in Northwest Europe because there's terminal capacity available. It's a liquid market. It could be observed in that liquid market. So there are uncertainties, pros and cons for each market, each region. And reflecting on these uncertainties, this is our latest view on the global LNG demand toward 2030. Last year, 2016, the total demand was about 260 million ton. Our view, some people say that we're a little bit conservative. We think we are realistic, that by 2030, it'll be about 412, 414 million ton. We're pretty sure about our demand forecast is pretty accurate, we hope, by 2020 because it's more driven by supply. We know which projects are under construction. There could be some delays, but Australian projects, US project, and those projects that took on FID should be producing LNG by 2020 or so. But beyond that, it depends on obviously the LNG demand growth, but also how new LNG project could take FID. This year, we're seeing only one or actually a Coral FLNG at Mozambique. Last year was Tangguh expansion and Elba Island, and I think I'm forgetting one. So there was 3, and this year only 1. If not by end of this year, definitely by next year, there needs to be several projects that take FID in order to match this demand. Just looking at this picture, JKT is kind of flat because Japan will go down, Korea and Taiwan will go up. China, India, strong growth under the condition that there will be price reform in the downstream and LNG will be competitive to some extent. Niche markets in Asia and Middle East are Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, Pakistan, later on Bangladesh, Vietnam, Philippines, and the Middle East will be Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Kuwait, and so forth. And then Europe, and then Americas. As I mentioned earlier, FSRU, FSU are the key drivers, and this world map shows the existing, under construction, and planned. In 2016, there were about 26 existing units. By 2020, we envisioned that it could be about 35 or so. Each project is unique. Each government is struggling, but with the help of World Bank and other institutions, they're moving forward. Now, looking a little bit closer to each market, and I do want to highlight on Asia Pacific, so the Pacific Basin graph on the right side. The dividing line between Atlantic Basin and Pacific Basin is the Suez Canal. Again, Japan is going down, but you can see other, mainly niche markets, growing strongly. And that's where opportunities exist for suppliers and buyers who are converting into portfolio players, like Japanese utilities. Then, also highlighting the niche markets, Asian niche markets. On the left side, those are the breakdowns of our view by market. Key uncertainties, as I said, will be the credit ratings, seasonality requirements, infrastructure investments, and the timing. It's great to hear that a lot of Japanese companies are very aggressively getting into these markets, starting from Thailand. JERA has agreement with or partnership with EGAT. Tokyo Gas has partnership with Petronas Malaysia, Pertamina Indonesia, very active in Philippines and so forth. Trading houses are active as well. Mitsubishi in Pakistan, working on FSRU together with Exxon, Qatar, and Total. I understand that Sri Lanka, Sojitz is taking the initiative to form a Japanese consortium. There are challenges. I would think that the Japanese players will involve NEXI, JBIC, the Japanese government. A lot of times it could be G2G discussion, which could be critical depending on the country. Briefly touching on the uncovered demand that I was talking about, the right side is Pacific Basin, and you can see that Japan's layer, there's no uncovered demand between 2018 and 2021 because we have more supply than demand. But I would think Japanese buyers will exercise DQT and divert cargoes like US LNG cargoes. And that's why flexibility of the contract is critical. But beyond 2021, we see increase in LNG demand, uncovered demand for Japan and other countries, Korea. That's where new supplies could come in to the market. This is the demand-supply balance of global market, and starting with base case. The red line is the total global LNG demand, and underneath is the layers for supply. Dark blue is existing supply. It would go down gradually because of the feed gas issue in Oman, Abu Dhabi, and so forth. On top, supply under construction that would come from Australia and the US and other places. And the gap starts to emerge in 2022. That's where a lot of new projects are aiming at. It's a good timing. However, I would like to show you the low case where if China and India demand didn't grow as expected, economic downturn or economic slowdown, and also the environmental policy where India might stick with coal, China might stick with coal-fired plants. And in this scenario, the opening of opportunity for new supply project will shift from 2022 to 2025. To be on the optimistic side, and this scenario is basically increasing the niche market demand. It wouldn't kick in 2-3 years because it takes time for niche markets to grow. So beyond, especially beyond 2020, slowly but surely, the demand will grow more than base case, and that's where new opportunities for supply will increase for suppliers and traditional suppliers and also buyers like Japan, Japanese. Last slide. A little bit beyond, this might be a little bit beyond this panel, but I do want to emphasize that we are in a very uncertain time, not only from the supply by demand point of view, but also from supplier's point of view. The small graph on the left side corner is the total demand and total existing contract of Japan, Korea, China. I could have added Taiwan, India, and so forth, but Taiwan is quite balanced. India is also balanced. Japan, Korea, China are the ones that are oversupplied from maybe this year till 2021 or so. So the dark blue area graph is the total of demand for 3 countries, and the orange line is the total of existing contracts, not taking into account DQT and so forth. So we are going to see oversupply situation of about 10 to 13 million ton, and then go down to 7 million ton, and by 2022, gone. A lot of Japanese buyers are starting to take actions, very strategic actions, as you may know. JERA has contract or partnership with EDFT, Osaka Gas with Uniper, Tokyo Gas with Centrica, and JERA with Centrica as well. Some of them could be, we don't know, but some of them must be a put option to European market. So they need to divert cargoes. And luckily, US LNG project supplies, not all, but some or a lot of them are destination free, so they can manage to do so. So that's the importance of US LNG supply into the future. We need to be a little bit careful because beyond 2022, Japan needs to have enough supply, a flexible supply, and we have a lot of existing contract to renegotiate. I think US LNG supply is critical, not only because of their flexible, but using that card and going back to the existing supply project and saying, well, we need to be very flexible too, because we can add more US LNG supply because they are flexible. That's the market know. Also, the challenge that Asian buyers are facing is that they need to divert cargoes beyond their home market. So it could be Europe, could be South America, could be Middle East, Africa. And that's a bit of challenge because that's a bit unique opportunity for Japanese buyers. Trading houses might have done it in the past. Actually, they have. So coordination between those parties might be critical as well. That's the end of my presentation. I think I combined a lot of things, but I'll be very happy to get questions and discuss further.
Great. Thank you very much, Kiyoshi. Now let's just quickly turn to Howard Grinsbeck, and then we'll do Q&A after both speakers. Thank you.
Well, I guess in light of Lou's opening remarks, first and most important, Elvis asked me to send his personal best regards to each of you. But on a more serious note, I'd like to thank both EPRINC and IEEJ for inviting me to participate in this workshop. EIA, a lot of kind words said about EIA, but we definitely benefit from the sharing of data and analytic perspectives on a range of policy of data and analytic issues with both Lou and his team at EPRINC, and we also work actually quite closely with IEEJ. Ken Koyama is a person we see most frequently on his many trips to Washington. So, we are takers as well as givers, and we do appreciate their work.
Did you send slides?
I did not. No. I don't want to. No, this is a non-typical EIA presentation. You will not get another set of slides, and it will not take a long time. And it's also a pleasure to join such distinguished participants, among them my former boss at EIA, Adam Saminsky. So, the eminent physicist Niels Bohr famously noted, prediction is very difficult, especially if it's about the future. I think Kiyoshi's presentation kind of shows some of that as well. And indeed, I think focusing more directly on energy, predictions about LNG demand are likely to be maybe more uncertain than demand projections for many other fuels for 2 reasons. First, there's a wide substitutability between natural gas and other fuels in many key applications and regional markets, with both economic factors, which I know something about, and policy factors, which I know little about, even though I sit in this town, both driving, fuel choice decisions. And then, as Kiyoshi pointed out, second, even in applications and markets where natural gas is the fuel of choice, the availability of other natural gas supply sources, such as gas imports via pipeline in some markets, and in some other markets, domestic production, can greatly affect the amount of natural gas that is supplied in the form of LNG. So I view it as like a two-stage problem, how much natural gas, and of the natural gas, how much LNG. So the organizers have loose, strict instructions that don't go through the EIA outlook, and I think I'm happy not to do that, actually, and spared me, and therefore spares you from the reviewing, another set of numbers. Instead, they've asked I discuss just some of the key uncertainties that might affect the markets in Asia, so I will do that. And what I want to do first is start by surrounding the uncertainties surrounding demand for natural gas in Asia, and then at the end turn to uncertainties about the supply of natural gas other than LNG, which clearly then affects, obviously, LNG. So electric power, is the main current use for LNG in Asia in the JKT, as described, dominated by really Japan and Korea. Projected growth in natural gas really, though, is not solely dependent on electricity. It's dependent, I think electric power does matter, but also industrial demand does matter. In some projections, it's the latter rather than the former that is a dominant driver of growth in natural gas use in some of the Asian economies. So in some of, there's clearly electricity important, but industrial demand is also important. So I want to sort of start with electric power and then go to industry. So with electric power, some of the key uncertainties for natural gas demand include the overall level of electricity demand growth, how well gas-fired generation will compete relative to alternative supply sources, notably renewables, coal, and nuclear. Again, economics is important, thank God for those of us who are economists, but other factors, including policies to promote renewables or to restore, remove, or add nuclear power. So renewables generally policy runs one way. Either there isn't a policy or there's a policy to promote it. I don't think anybody has policies to discourage renewables. But nuclear, you really have the full gamut. You have restore, in the case of Japan. You have remove, in the case of, whatever, some discussion of Taiwan, perhaps, the new administration in Korea. And certainly you have an add policy in some places. China has a very strong add policy. And those also affect the electricity supply mix. So starting with overall electricity demand, the growth outlook is relatively strong, in non-OECD Asia. I mean, we're sitting here in the United States, a country where demand is at the same level that it was 10 years ago. But weaker in, highly developed Asian countries, especially Japan, where electricity load today is still well below its pre-Fukushima level, and population is declining. So we've had stable, load in the United States with rising population. Japan has declining. It's not just population, but that's certainly part of the picture. So to the extent that electricity demand growth in Asia surprises to the downside, there's less need for all types of generation, including that fueled by natural gas, but also vice versa, to the extent it surprises to the upside, more generation. So turning to the fuel mix used to meet electricity demand in Asia, there are both economic and non-economic questions about the role of LNG. I think one key question is the delivered cost of LNG into Asia. So certainly current spot prices into Asia that cover the going forward costs of the natural gas supply, system, but not the considerable investment that's been made in liquefaction capacity. Certainly good news for buyers. I'd like to buy gas at $5 or $6 a million BTU delivered into Asia. And it also certainly provides a strong encouragement for LNG use. However, investors in new liquefaction and shipping capacity, that's not the situation that the existing investors wanted to be in. And certainly the investors in the new, liquefaction and shipping capacity that is discussed, needed, we'll definitely be looking toward prices that provide normal capital returns over the lives of those investments, as well as covering their feedstock and operating costs. So several observers have suggested, and there's probably uncertainty about this as well, that delivered LNG prices into Asia in the range of $8 to $9 per million BTU would represent a price level that would cover both fixed and variable costs for liquefaction projects in North America. So I just picked, I'll pick $9 per million BTU delivered to an Asian combined cycle power plant, and I'll take a heat rate of about 6,500 BTUs per kilowatt hour, which is better than a 50% conversion efficiency. I think some of the units sold, the sellers would claim they're better than that, but that's under perfect test track conditions, not realistic conditions. So it's pretty aggressive on the heat rates, but I think reasonable. So you have $9 per million BTU, 6,500 BTUs per kilowatt hour. That translates into a fuel-only cost of generating power using LNG at just under 6 cents per kilowatt hour. That's not the plant, that's not the other operating costs. And that raises several questions. So first, are the fuel costs of gas-fired generation high enough so that it would be attractive for countries in Asia? And again, different countries will have different opportunities, but it would be attractive for countries in Asia to deploy renewable generation, even if they build gas plants to supply reliable power, in order to save on the costs of fuel during periods when renewable resources are available. So if you can build renewable plants that all-in cost is less than 6 cents a kilowatt hour, even if you understand they're intermittent and they don't provide reliable power and all that stuff, but if you can do that for less than 6 cents a kilowatt hour and the gas is going to cost you 6 cents a kilowatt hour, you would build those, presumably economically, you'd build those in addition to your gas plants, and you not use the gas plants to, not run them when the intermittent renewable resources are available. So, if that in fact happens, as current cost estimates suggest is possible, I don't want to assert strongly that it's a deadlock cinch, but the amount of gas that's actually consumed for power generation in Asia could be much lower than it might be if natural gas generation capacity that gets built were to be utilized without sort of renewables behind them as a fuel-saving backup. So it may affect less the builders of the gas-fired power plants, but that's not what this meeting's about. This meeting's about the suppliers of gas. So, that's an interesting question. Second, looking beyond renewables, coal and nuclear provide other alternatives to generation using natural gas in Asia, although they do face significant, public opposition in some cases. We all know about Japan and Taiwan and the new government in Korea even, I think. So, and that's like a safety-related concern. I'm not saying there is a safety problem. It's just that there's a concern about it. In the case of nuclear or local air quality and carbon dioxide emissions concerns related to coal, and I think in many cases there's a feeling that maybe it's mostly the local air quality concerns related to coal, not the carbon dioxide emissions, but the countries do also have policies and interests related to CO2 emissions. So new coal plants are much more economically competitive with natural gas in Asia than they are in North America, and that reflects both significantly lower costs for constructing coal plants in Asia than in North America, together with delivered gas prices in Asia that are going to be significantly higher than the prices in North America, which, as Rick and others have described, North America is a great producing hub. So, in Japan, I think there's, many commentators have already discussed that it's likely maybe a declining role for natural gas. You have this electricity demand that's probably not growing, if indeed it grows at all, it may be declining. Significantly affected by the extent to which the national government is successful in restoring nuclear capacity per its announced targets. I think some people think those announced targets are probably unrealistically ambitious, but, I think the government has those targets, and the government also has targets for the growth in renewable generation. And so this was, I think, noted in the Tanaka-san's opening remarks, and There'll obviously also be sensitivity to the level of coal-fired generation in Japan, which has increased. So again, there's like a question of what's happening to the overall market and what's the gas piece of it. And, you know, again, the role of all alternatives to gas-fired generation, renewables, nuclear, coal, all affected by policies. Again, the air quality concerns, certainly a very big concern in China, even though local pollution presumably could be addressed using various pollution control technologies, which have to be installed and also have to run on the plants to have that effect. And those effects can be mitigated. Many countries have expressed interest in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, results mainly from all sorts of fossil fuel combustion. Economists often note the distinction between stated preferences and revealed preferences, and there may be differences between countries' stated preferences and their revealed preferences in this, but electricity is certainly a critical sector for making emissions reductions. That can be either good or bad for natural gas demand, depending on how deeply emissions are cut. So natural gas provides probably a 50 to 60% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions per kilowatt hour relative to coal. Closer to 60% of the United States, because our coal plants are pretty, subcritical kind of coal plants. But if you're competing against a supercritical, ultra supercritical plant, probably on the order of 50%. And that could be very helpful in providing carbon dioxide reductions. But deep decarbonization efforts that have been espoused, at least in theory, by many developed countries in Asia and elsewhere, would necessitate almost total reliance on carbon-free energy sources such as renewables and nuclear, or carbon capture and sequestration, which is another technology, but that might have a lot of cost problems associated with it. So again, definitely moves you toward lower emissions, moving toward natural gas, but if your ultimate goal is, virtually emission-free electricity, the question is, do you want to go there? So moving on to industrial demand, where I will be briefer, one needs to consider both the fuel mix within the industrial sector and the level of industrial activity, particularly in energy-intensive industries. So the key fuel competition for natural gas in industrial markets really comes from petroleum and coal rather than from renewables. Oil at about $50 a barrel doesn't provide a particularly strong incentive to switching to LNG at $8 to $9 a million BTU. So expectations of future oil prices become a key consideration. And I'm not sure what's behind the potent base case there. I will say that EIA has oil prices generally rising relative to natural gas prices. But again, that's our outlook, and I wasn't going to discuss our outlook. So natural gas is much more useful than coal in many industrial applications, but this advantage must be weighed against the big difference between LNG in the $8 to $9 a million BTU range and the cost of coal. There's a lot of coal-based industrial activity, including the use of coal as a feedstock as well as a fuel in China. But again, public concerns about local air quality issues could certainly be a powerful driver for substituting natural gas in such applications. So that's talking about the fuel mix in industrial applications. Now I want to turn to the level of industrial activity. That responds clearly to overall economic conditions, and I think that was mentioned in the previous discussion, that how robust overall economies are is going to affect the demand. But beyond overall economic activity levels, the siting of energy-intensive industrial activity is another large uncertainty surrounding industrial demand for natural gas in Asia. So the sourcing of natural gas-intensive industrial products, such as methanol, fertilizers, and ethylene-based petrochemicals, from markets where natural gas is low in cost, like North America, is one possible alternative to moving gas in the form of LNG into Asia to provide fuel and feedstock for the production of those exact same things, in Asia. So, we do see a lot of, some of this has been done before, so there's some questions like with propane, for instance, not natural gas, But propane, there's no question, at one point they were going to build a lot of PDH, propane dehydrogen, I can't say it, but you know what I mean, PDH chemical plants in the United States and export the products, to some of the markets where demand is growing. But in fact, in the case of propane, we actually are sending the propane to Asia, and a lot of those proposed PDH plants in North America have been canceled. So in that case, we are exporting the fuel to the market where it'll be used in an industrial process rather than doing the industrial activity here and exporting the product. But again, propane's a lot easier to transport and cheaper to transport than natural gas, than building a huge plant to liquefy natural gas. And maybe it would be cheaper to transport fertilizer or methanol than to transport LNG and make fertilizer or methanol using that LNG in Asia. So I think that's a very important question. It'll hinge on the relative economics of moving the natural gas versus the economics of moving the gas-intensive products. But again, it's not just economics, because nothing ever is. I mean, I wish it was all economics, because then I'd be the king. But in fact, government policies are also going to have some influence on this. So countries are going to have a view of how much they want to be reliant on, external sources. So in the interest of time, I won't say much about the use of compressed natural gas or LNG in transportation, except to note that the relationship between natural gas and oil prices is potentially, a key factor in determining the future role of natural gas in that sector. So to this point, I'm really getting to the end, I promise. My focus has been on uncertainties influencing natural gas demand in Asia. But a final key area, as has been mentioned before, is the share of overall natural gas demand that will be met with LNG. There are a lot of more expert people in the room than me on this. There's certainly some locations in Asia where LNG is the only significant supply of natural gas available. But domestic production and pipeline imports are important or potentially important sources of natural gas in many parts of Asia. So, if again, China's, which has not met its initial shale gas targets, say, that they proposed five years, say in 2010, but if they start to become more successful than it has been in recent years, or, they're a higher level than whatever a base case view of pipeline imports from Russia, Central Asia, or even the Middle East, into Asian markets, that has significant implications for how much of the overall natural gas demand in Asia is met by LNG. Of course, the uncertainty there is two-sided, as all the previous uncertainties I've discussed. To the extent that domestic production and pipeline imports disappoint relative to whatever's projections, are lying behind LNG projections, then you're going to see, more push for LNG. So, again, a very generic discussion of uncertainties. And with those comments, I look forward to an interesting discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Howard. All right, so since Lou didn't tell me that I couldn't use slides, I'm going to draw a slide for you, and you can picture it. EIA's 2017 Annual Energy Outlook, LNG exports from the United States. So they're basically, I'm going to divide it up into three rough cases. The reference case, 2030 and 2040, and then kind of the combination of the high oil price, high technology case, and the low oil price, low technology case. So the technology case basically means how productive the oil shale is and factors like that. So in the reference case, there's 2030 to 2040, 11 billion cubic feet a day, maybe 12 billion cubic feet a day of LNG exports. That's a lot. I mean, the number a year ago was close to zero. Right? So, in the low case, 6 BCF a day in 2030 and 8 BCF a day in 2040. In the high oil and gas price, and that gets really interesting, 17 roughly billion cubic feet a day in 2030 and 23 billion cubic feet a day in 2040. So the range, the potential range of U.S. LNG exports is really pretty wide. I've tended to lean towards the higher oil price, higher technology case. Certainly the higher technology case, even in today's environment. One of the interesting things that I like to point out about Kyochi's presentation is he kind of has an inflection point occurring around 2022 when LNG supply is beginning to have a little bit of a shortfall relative to demand. There are certainly people who are concerned about the possibility that the lack of investment since the drop in oil prices in 2014 could result in a supply gap for conventional crude oil that might actually hit us in about that same time frame, so sometime into the early 2020s. So keep that in mind. Okay, my second and final slide, then we'll have questions, is 5 bullet points, right? I'm going to go through 5 things. These are going to be easy to write down. I'm going to kind of try to summarize a little bit of what Kyochi and Howard said for you in 5 bullet points. What are the factors that could affect LNG demand in Asia? So number 1, economic factors, income growth, and then currently lower gas prices, but what oil and gas prices might do out into the future. So these are the things that you have to think about. The second point is interfuel competition. So how is it going to work out for coal, nuclear, and renewables relative to LNG? The third factor, environmental considerations, air pollution in major cities in Asia, for example, but also climate initiatives. Both of these things were addressed. The fourth bullet point, I'd call it policy issues. Power market and gas market reform. You might have recalled some of those comments on Kyochi's first slide of going through all the markets, how many places there were subsidies or price controls, and how that could affect both the natural gas and power markets. And then the fifth and final bullet point, I would call it delivery competition. And how is the gas going to get to the markets in Asia? Is it going to be by LNG, which is the focus of this meeting, or could it be by pipeline? And how do the economics and policy choices push the type of delivery that we would envision? So economic factors, interfuel competition, environmental considerations, policy issues, and then delivery competition. With that, let's just open it up for questions. Actually, Rick, I'm going to let you ask. I'm going to ask the first question, and you're going to answer it. Sasha Reiser-Kositsky from the Eurasia Group was supposed to be with us. He couldn't make it today. He was going to talk about the India and kind of subcontinent issues for LNG. And I thought, Rick, you might be able to just give us a sentence or two on how you see things developing in India.
You know, Adam, India has always been an interesting market, and as you frame things out in the Asia Pacific, we often focus on China. So just a quick comment there to start out. You know, many people were watching the White House announcement on May 11th, which culminated after the U.S.-China Comprehensive Economic Dialogue. And if you'll recall, that announcement really focused around what I would consider more of an education. It was really helping the Chinese to know that, yes, we're open for business here, and there are no legal or regulatory restrictions on the exports of LNG to their country. So they've expressed an interest. That tends to be one of 2 elephants in the room. I come over to India, and I recall from my industry days, I spent 20 years with ExxonMobil, and as a matter of fact, I was the one who actually created Exxon's equity marketing strategy for LNG during my days there. And we looked particularly at the markets around the Asia Pacific and India. And perhaps the biggest impedance to getting into that marketplace was always one around not so much the regulatory environment, but how do you get paid? And, you know, some of those challenges still remain on the table more than a decade later. And so as we watch a combination of the economic factors as well as the regulatory factors, I think with the current administration in India, we see a focus on a true integration of renewables. They've stated some very aggressive goals, but also addressing the overall access to energy and some of the challenges that they have throughout the country to meet the growth that we've seen in the GDP. India is poised to be the next, if you will, demand center in the Asia Pacific, but a lot of this really depends on if they can get that economic landscape right and find that proper balance there, Adam. So it is one where I would encourage everyone to watch, but I think there's some commercial factors at play there as much as regulatory factors that will ultimately balance out that demand we see coming from there. Hope that's helpful.
Okay, Rick, thanks very much. And if you have a question, why don't you put your card up and please identify yourself when you ask your question, and please.
Adam, I'd like to return the favor
please
if
try
I
to
can, please.
finish your sentence, you know, with a rising voice so that we hear that question mark at the end. So
okay. Well, first of all, thank you to both the presenters and yourself, Adam. This is always very useful. One of the questions I have is, you know, as the U.S. is poised to become kind of one of the big three in terms of LNG exports, the competitiveness of LNG also depends on the interplay with oil. In Qatar, for instance, what you see is the high condensate yield, which ultimately keeps their cost of production down, and depending on how they allocate that out, can make them very competitive. Now come to the U.S., and it's interesting, there is a little bit of an analog here insofar as what we're seeing, the wells, the shale revolution, the wells that we're seeing being drilled here are the liquid-rich wells and based off of oil economics. But we're also seeing quite a bit of natural gas production, and again, as our colleagues have noted, that's where it's coming from. I would be interested, you've noted some very good factors there, but how does that play into it in terms of as you start to see either prices remain flat or increase? You know, how do you see those oil and gas economics interplaying based on that particular aspect?
Kyochi, you want to tackle that? So
I'll do my best.
The yield of natural gas liquids from. Now, one of the interesting things about Qatar, maybe somebody else here has a view on this, is given the diplomatic crisis between Qatar and the Gulf states, one of the concerns was that handling and getting rid of the natural gas liquids yields from the LNG might actually make it difficult to produce the LNG. So, Kyochi, over to you.
As you mentioned, the Qatar's additional LNG will be very, very, very competitive. If they include liquids, the condensate in the cost structure, it's really competitive. But that doesn't mean that Qatar will sell cheaply. They have been very aggressive, as we know. They stuck with very high slope to oil linkage, oil indexation, especially to Japanese. Not that I know all the contracts, but so low cost, but might not be as cheap as people think. On the other hand, US LNG projects, basically lean gas, yes, there could be liquid if you focus on Permian, but that I haven't seen any contract that translate into low cost or low price because of the liquid in the upstream. Now, in public domain, reading investor relations documents of Tellurian and some others, it sounds like Tellurian is still thinking about how to come up with a structure. They're willing to provide all kinds of flexibility, price indexations, fixed, hybrid, whatnot. It seems like they are going to look into upstream. Instead of paying Henry Hub level price as feed gas, it seems like they're going to use their capex to a certain extent to the upstream, maybe in Permian somewhere where there's liquid. And because of that, maybe they're going to reduce the cost, meaning, and it seems like they're differentiating the capex and opex and some costs on the capex side, and trying to provide very competitive LNG. That sounds like what you mentioned, combining the liquids benefit of the upstream to SPA or tolling or offtake agreement. But I'm an outsider, I'm not sure, and maybe it's being discussed. So maybe that's a new model. But again, I think it's early days that we can definitely say, okay, this is what the US LNG project will provide.
So, I mean, just from our perspective, you know, all the plays are different from each other. I mean, so there is some liquids in the gas. Certainly people go for the wetter gas, so say in the southwest of the Marcellus versus the northeast of the Marcellus. But that's not really about oil. That's about natural gas and natural gas liquids. You know, in something like the Permian, you really have what I guess traditionally would have been called associated gas, you know, where you're going after oil. You know, let's call it oil, you know, and you're getting, along with your oil, you're getting gas. And that certainly, you know, to some extent there is a response then of the amount of gas production in the Permian to how aggressively, you know, the drilling program is, which is mostly an oil-directed drilling program. And that affects the overall gas balance, you know, in the United States and what gas prices are in the United States, although in terms of where that gas is physically going, you know, it could be physically going to Mexico if things work out right. You know, some of it could be physically moving toward the LNG liquefaction complexes on the Gulf Coast as well. I mean, the liquefaction, you know, is sucking gas from all over the place, you know, potentially even sucking gas from Canada, you know, into some of that facility. But, you know, there's definitely a connection between, you know, the associated, I guess what I would call it associated gas, which to me is a little bit different than, in my mind, although it's a continuum, when I think about like wet gas and dry gas, that's like a different thing. That's about, you know, you're going to take the thing right out of the well and put it in the pipeline, or you're going to take it right out of the well, put it through a natural gas processing plant, pull off the ethane and the propane. So, but, you know, in EIA's world, we do see production, you know, at the kind of prices we envision, which is like low $50 prices. We see oil production going up. We see that going up in the Permian, and that is one of the factors that's going to you know, help increase natural gas production, this associated gas.
Just one quick addendum to that, Howard. The Shell ethane cracker up south of Pittsburgh will also increase gas production in the Marcellus, because when you can produce that gas, and it's difficult to move the gas, as Howard was saying, if it's too wet, and by building that cracker, you're going to increase gas production, which could flow into the LNG markets potentially. I saw Greg Bartholomew's flag go up first.
This is Washington, so I thought I'd ask a political question. To what extent will balance of trade considerations impact Asia's contracting of U.S. LNG?
So balance of trade policies from the Trump administration impact on LNG. Does anybody want to?
Maybe I'll just say.
Lou is going to answer that.
No, I'm not going to answer that. But I mean, you might want to save that question for Tristan Abbey from the NSC. He'll be here at lunchtime. I mean, if we don't get sabotaged. But so far it looks good. So I think you might want to save that for.
Since I'm no longer at EIA, actually, I'm allowed to have an opinion on things. And here's something I think that everybody should keep in mind, is for years in Washington, we've thought about politics on I'm going to call it kind of a horizontal axis, and the axis might have been the left and the right, it might have been the Democrats and the Republicans, it might have been conservatives and liberals, but they were all sort of on that horizontal axis of some type. And I think that what we're looking at with President Trump is a new axis, and that axis is internationalism versus domestic, America first. And that's a very different consideration. And in an America First framework, the idea of doing bilateral deals with countries like Korea or Japan or somebody that emphasize U.S. LNG exports as a way to reduce the trade deficit is something that I think is definitely on the table. So it's very different than I think what we used to see before, and I think we might see more of it. There was a question down at the very far end of the table in the corner. And could you identify yourself, please?
My name is Yoshi Kobayashi from the Institute of Energy Economics Japan. I have a question to both Miyazaki-san and Grunsbeck-san. One question to both of you, and one question to Miyazaki-san. The first one is competitiveness of LNG in ASEAN countries. Asia is very wide. We have many countries. So I agree that LNG can be competitive in countries like Pakistan or Sri Lanka because it replaces the oil-fired power generation. But things may be a little bit different in ASEAN countries. I have an understanding that LNG cannot be competitive without policy support in ASEAN countries. It may be energy mix target, or it may be environmental regulations or carbon pricing, or maybe tax break for infrastructure development. But without policy support, LNG cannot be competitive in ASEAN countries. I'd like to hear your views on this. That is my first question. And the second question to Miyazaki-san is...
Could you just stop there for just a second?
Okay.
Let's answer that first question.
I'm not 100% sure, but it depends competitive with what. So I just want to be careful because, again, you have the electric power story, and then you have the industrial story. In much of the industrial story, you're talking about LNG, let's say, potentially, and in some cases, electric power as well. As my colleague has pointed out, you're talking about competition with oil-based fuels. And, of course, oil-based fuels don't cost exactly what crude oil costs, but they, some are lower, some are higher. But if a lot would depend, and again, I'll just pick my $8 to $9 a million BTU number, which one could take issue with. But if you looked at $8 to $9 a million BTU and multiplied it by 6, you're in the $50-ish, say 6 million BTU in a barrel of oil. So that's why I multiplied by 6. So $50 oil's tough, but $8 to $9 a million BTU LNG competing with $70 oil or $75 oil or $65 oil, I don't know that you need necessarily policy support there. Now, how well it does with renewables and how well it does with coal, I think the policy environment could be very important to that. But that's not necessarily policy support. That may be policies related to either local air quality, climate change, whatever. It has nothing to do with we're going to favor LNG. So there could be general policy environment considerations that would help it. I mean, that's really all I would say. I would turn to my colleague.
I basically agree.
Kiyoshi agrees.
Yes, but,
okay.
but there's another question?
Yeah.
Related to the first one, to Miyazaki-san, is you mentioned that your firm is involved in the infrastructure development in Asia, and you feel that the government-to-government discussion is getting more critical in such project. in which area government-to-government discussion is getting more critical? You suggested that the financing is certainly one of the issues. And is there any other areas where the government-to-government discussion is getting more important, like regulations or some other issues?
I hope this wouldn't be too controversial, but usually,
Go ahead.
I think tender process is important to have a competitive price for natural gas, for LNG, FSRU or onshore, or even the pipeline gas, the pipeline development in the country and so forth. But sometimes because of the historical context or tradition that, and I cannot name which one, but there's historical context that it might be better to have a government-to-government discussion because the market could be small to start with, could be highly seasonal, which is a bit difficult to do tender process because even the government on the diminished market side don't know what could happen. And if there's huge uncertainty, it might be better to have government-to-government discussion and provide infrastructure. A lot of times this will include the power generators. It will include the pipeline buildup. And like Japanese governments are always saying, the package deal might be better in some instances. But a lot of times I think tender process is more transparent and all. And a lot of times there's regulation on this host government side that they need to tender unless it's urgent or whatever. So there are a lot of conditions when you want to pursue G2G. But sometimes it might be faster because of the huge uncertainties. But we're not promoting either one. When we talk with governments, we try to lay out the case studies. This is a good case study for this option. This is a good case study for another option. But it does take time either way.
Okay, thank you, Kiyoshi. So we have 5 minutes left in this session. So why don't I want to hear, I only see 2 flags up. There was another one down here, but I see 2 flags. Why don't you, your question was answered. Want you to ask your questions, and then we'll have an answer to both sets of questions. So we'll start here.
All right, thanks. Alan Townsend from the IFC. I'll just make a couple quick comments. One, Howard, I loved what you said about all-in renewables being less than the cost of certain fossil fuels. And that providing opportunities. IFC, that is part of our strategy. We are mining our global portfolio to specifically approach clients and countries where there's an opportunity, particularly to back out high-cost oil-fired generation. But we do see that opportunity being there for gas-fired generation as well in certain markets. And that leads into my second comment, which is that the LNG industry doesn't actually need policy support that would cause customers and countries to pay more for power generation than they should, okay? There is an economic case today for the midstream infrastructure and for the power generation capacity. At a minimum, the economic value is in the mid-cycle and peaking parts of the curve to complement renewables, to meet peak demand, to back out oil. And it would be a mistake, in my view, to advocate policies which may not prove sustainable in places. I would note that fairly bad pricing policies in India today have idled somewhere around 27,000 megawatts of relatively recent gas-fired capacity. That is, roughly speaking, the equivalent of a TCF gas demand per year. If it was run at a reasonable dispatch rate. And when you start to intervene in markets and say, we're going to do this and we're going to do that to create space for this, that, and the other thing, if it's not sustainable, you wind up with stranded assets. Now, there is an economic value to that capacity in India, which is not being recognized by the efforts to manage every component of pricing, or the instinct to do so at the very least. So we think in the World Bank Group that a better approach is to help countries recognize the value of flexible capacity and then let interfuel markets do what they do. When gas is relatively cheaper, it'll be used, that capacity will be used relatively more to the benefit of consumers. And when gas is relatively more expensive, it may be used a little less, but again, to the benefit of consumers. That is a sustainable path. I apologize for not asking a question.
Okay, Dave, do you have a question, or would you like to make a comment?
I have a question, but it's remarkably. But Alan's comment was a great setup, because my question is about that.
For the camera, this is David Goldwyn.
Sorry, David Goldwyn, Goldwyn Global Strategies. My question is about, especially with so many Japanese colleagues here, about Japan's gas demand. And specifically, I understand that in late 2015, 2016, Japanese Diet was looking at new design for the Japanese electricity market to deal with the political issues of how do you not strand assets like nuclear, how do you deal with de-risking others and other assets, and how do you integrate renewables into the process. And that policy, how you intervene and whether or not you create space for renewables or assure space for particular fuels, seems to be the biggest driver in where Japan's gas demand is going. So what's new on that front? Is there a new design? And does it guarantee space for gas or nuclear or renewables? And what does that tell us about Japan's future LNG demand?
So Kiyoshi, power market design in Japan and its impact on LNG?
It's a great question for many people.
Right, so maybe we'll save that for the next panel. In all seriousness, we're going to be getting into that later on, so maybe we should save it for that. Market intervention issues, flexible capacities, Kiyoshi or Howard, do you have any thoughts on that?
No.
No. Okay. The gentleman's comment stands without rebuttal.
Well, since he was agreeing with me, it would be rude to rebut.
Yes, please. Adam, Rick, go ahead. Rick Smead.
Rick Smead with RBN Energy. This is partly a comment, partly a question. Kiyoshi, did I do the math right that at about 413 million tons a year of 2030 LNG demand globally, isn't that about exactly equal to the capacity of the applications pending before DOE? And I guess the question is 100% market share pretty good for a startup business?
Yes, I think your numbers are correct. So it's really amazing that this country, United States, have that much applications. And I think a lot of companies know that it's very, very, very competitive. And they really need buyers. They need reliable buyers, they're hoping that they could get long-term contracts. So it's up to buyers in a way to choose which project to move forward. And I think, again, I'm not saying this because I'm Japanese, but I think Japanese buyers are highly regarded. Koreans as well. Chinese, a bit difficult to negotiate because they have portfolio, domestic production, pipeline gas, and so forth. Again, I've been living in the States for 13 years, and when I was here earlier on, it was import terminals build up. Huge mountain of import terminal capacity that were discussed. Now it's export capacity. I don't think it will shift again. I hope not. But that when I think U.S. comes into the play, things could be really, really dynamic.
Yeah. I don't think that the permits at either FERC or the U.S. Department of Energy prevented projects from moving forward. It's probably, if anything, market conditions are the biggest issue at this point. EIA did actually study what would happen in domestic gas markets if LNG exports from the U.S. ranged as high as 20 billion cubic feet a day. Howard could address that, but I think, Howard, if I get this wrong, let me know, but I think the essence was it would raise domestic natural gas prices, but the increase would be relatively modest, single-digit numbers at the industrial utility level, and very low single-digit numbers at the residential level in terms of price increases, and it had a positive effect on GDP. One of the interesting things that we found at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, and we did a roundtable on this a few weeks ago, was there does seem to be an interesting revival of the idea of policy issues with petrochemical manufacturers and others who use natural gas looking to constrain LNG exports because they feel that the economics and job creation opportunities of using the gas here are greater than if LNG were exported. And I'm not really sure that that has been shown by the economic studies that I've seen, and maybe there are people here who that know about that. And Howard looks like he wants to make
to say a little bit, yeah. So when we do this, we do tend to find that most of the, if there's more demand for North American gas, that most of it comes from incremental supply. But just like I spoke about in Asia, that there's interfuel competition in the electric sector, guess what? There's interfuel competition in the electric sector in the United States as well. And it's mostly what doesn't come from new supply, does come by adjustments that respond to some of these price changes for the various fuels, which do affect the electric generation mix. So it's the electric sector, just like the electric sector is very critical in terms of fuel substitution elsewhere, it's also the same is true in North America. But most of it does come from additional production.
Okay, thank you very much. Please join me in thanking Kiyoshi Miyazaki and Howard Grunsbeck.
So we're going to take a 15-minute break and come back. And we're going to play musical chairs again on this end. So thank you all. So I think there's coffee in the back here.